Thank you for joining us on another episode of Latter-Gay Stories podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Ashworth, and we are thankful and excited to have you along for this episode. The Latter-Gay Stories podcast is your opportunity to better understand the intersection of sexuality and reality where it meets at LDS Street and LGBTQ Avenue. This podcast episode is being broadcast in video and audio format. If you are watching on the video version, we want to invite you to make a comment below. If you have a comment for the podcast in general, or for one of our interviewees today, one of the guests of the podcast, we invite you to share that below, and we will have kind of a real-time discussion about this episode as we follow along. And if you're listening on the audio version, we invite you to subscribe and give this channel a rating. We are everywhere you find your favorite audio podcasts through Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartMedia, and others. Wherever you're catching the audio version, we invite you to share this episode and subscribe to this channel. Again, it's episodes like this that help us to build bigger and stronger bridges between the LDS and LGBT community, and this podcast episode is not any different. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what it means to be authentic and honest in your journey, the important part of understanding who you are, and what you can become. It will be a great episode to understand what the journey looks like through both trial and error, and also through the important part of being true to yourself. So without much ado, or without further ado, we want to welcome to the podcast episode, Jennifer and Shaunie.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I'm excited to have you here on this episode because you have a fascinating story.
We definitely have a story.
A story. I like stories.
I do too.
So Shaunie Schow and Jennifer Saunders. Yes. Why don't we start with you, Jen? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my gosh, where do we begin? I described...
And in the beginning there was.
Right?
In the beginning.
In July of 1972, the world was graced.
That's almost 7 years ago.
Something like that.
No, just kidding.
A little bit about myself. I love life. I love to experience... I'm probably one of those afraid to miss out kind of people. And my mom will tell stories of when I was younger and trying to put me to sleep. And she would hold my head down on her lap, and she would do this kind of stuff because I wanted to be, I say it's just because I wanted to be up and in the action. And I still am like that. I love meeting people. I love hearing stories. I just love life. I love being active, the outdoors, time camping, hiking, whatever I can do outside. I love that.
What do you do for work?
I am a personal trainer and life coach and do a little public speaking. Moving into more the life coach part of things, just again, because I love helping people uncover or rediscover who they already are. I have a philosophy that people aren't broken. We may be really dented in, and I like to help kind of push those dents out and help people rediscover who they are.
That's great. And we'll talk a little bit about your public speaking too in this podcast episode because
thank you.
You kind of have a fascinating story there. Shaunie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
This
for
is forced free
me.
agency.
I was going to say, I just want to say thank you to Shaunie because it is forced free agency today. This is a hard thing for her, so thanks, babe, for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I grew up in Idaho, pretty sheltered. I believe I was born a healer by nature, caregiver, and that's manifest in a lot of places in my life. And so I think helping people is what I was made to do. I work at a cancer institute currently, and just helping people through that transition and all the fear that they get to experience with the cancer word. And their families, really, because it's kind of a group thing. When somebody goes through cancer, it's a family issue. And so we get to help not only the caregivers, but the patients themselves through the most fear-based time in their life. Brings joy.
That's the exciting part that I think I'm so excited about this episode because I think we have the opportunity to break through and share a message of joy and hope but also not hide the struggle and what it takes to get to this point.
And I love that part right there is just not hiding the struggle.
So let's start. Jen, at what point did you realize I'm different?
I don't know that I have an actual point. I just remember growing up a total tomboy, You know, again, love being outdoors, having a dirty face. And I never liked the girly things. I remember being given Barbie dolls as a kid. And the last one I remember is I took it out of the package and I stuffed it in my drawer, and I don't know what happened to it. Like I just never was interested in that kind of stuff. So I always felt different. You know, my parents were divorced when I was 8 years old. I'm the oldest of 4. And I felt a difference there. And then just as we started to mature, high school, I thought boys were cute. I still think boys are cute. But I just started to, I don't know, when I'm looking back, like I didn't recognize it when I was in it in high school. I started to recognize a lot in college, probably, that, oh, this is what's been going on. And then looking back thinking, oh, that's what that was. Oh, when I just thought I was wanting to be really close friends with that person, I actually had a liking for them, but no vocabulary to put it in. So college is probably that place for me. When I was at Rick's College, I actually had people come up to me and say, are you a dyke? I didn't even know what that was. And so that was a whole new world for me. And I had to be like, what does that even mean? And I think I kind of know, but not really. So probably my 3rd year of college is when I would say I knew.
Boom. That was it. Shaunie, what about you?
I probably, growing up, fairly naive to a lot of things. We never discussed homosexuality. We never discussed really anything about dating. And so there wasn't anything for me to look at other than the church examples or my parents. And so probably growing up having an attraction that I didn't understand to these people. I just wanted to be around them because they were cool. My first experience probably was in high school, and it was very natural to have the attraction, but then all of the outside forces, the church, the society, as they deem it, you know, irregular or dirty or unnatural, you know. And so those kind of things, as you learn as a child, when you do something wrong, you, instead of coming forth with it and being honest, you hide it. And so I found that was an easy transition for me, that when I had these feelings, because it wasn't acceptable, that I would hide them. And I would do everything in my power to hide that from people, a natural feeling. And that was really an odd process for me, growing up being honest and loving and not being able to share those things that were just like a natural feeling, but I didn't understand it because I had nothing to base it off of. So I think I had a hint when I had some physical experiences when I was younger, and then just kind of thought, oh, well, this is what people do. This is what they do when they're dating, but I knew that it was irregular because it wasn't, you know, things that you do in high school. And I would go to all the dances and I would still participate in church activities and things, but I had this other secret. I had this other feeling and that could never be shared with anyone, which was really, as you look back, is frightening that you couldn't be authentic.
Let's talk about that, because Jenn, you're nodding your head saying, I remember that, and listeners or people who are watching this episode are saying, oh, I remember that feeling of closetedness. Let's talk about why we felt like we couldn't come out. Now, you kind of hit on that sense of normalcy, just wanting to be normal. Why do people stay closeted? Why did you keep it hid?
So, so I probably knew, like my third year of college, my roommate kissed me and all the lights went on. But I was still in a place of like really halo wearing. I followed the path, and you know, I didn't want to go out of the lines, and I had everything just set out for me. Like I knew I was a perfectionistic kind of person. I was a people pleaser, and so I followed all those paths. But as I really came to have an understanding of what this was for me, which was later on in life, I hid because I knew what it was. I had, by that point, listened to all of the stuff around me and people around me, and I wanted to fit in. Like I wanted to be a part of this community where I had spent my life and gathered all of the love and appreciation and self-worth. And so hiding, it was really hard to come out because I was afraid to lose everything, really. I was afraid to lose family. I was afraid to lose friends. I was afraid to lose me, quite frankly. And I didn't know what any of that would look like, whereas I knew what this stuff did, even though it was painful. And so in some ways it was easier to stay hidden for a while until it wasn't. Like, it would just eat me up inside.
So often the mindset of the closeted person is that you live in this fortress and you build this wall around, and then you build a second wall in case that first wall wasn't strong enough.
And then a moat.
And then a moat, exactly right. And fire, and then you set guards out there, and then you set all of these fake things that exist to distract from what the fortress should really look like, and you paint the exterior of the fortress. So if anyone ever deserves an Oscar, it's the gay, closeted person, because for acting and their stage abilities to create scenarios and scenes that don't exist, that's exactly what this world is like.
It's amazing what we come up with. Yeah. It's amazing what we come up with.
How do you think church and religion played into each of your closeted experiences?
For myself, church was my safe haven. It was a place that it's a place I went to when things were crazy inside my household, or I didn't feel like I may have fit in other places, whether it be school, or I had a really great group of friends. I had 5 of us that they were solid. They kept me going, and they didn't understand my situation. They all had families that were married, but they had enough love for me that they would let me share and just help build me up. And church was a place where I could go and find God, where I could find some peace, and so for me, it played a role in that if I step outside of this, then I'm stepping outside of that castle. I look down there and there's all the people in their armor and they want to hack me up. And that's kind of what it felt like for me, is stepping outside of that. I didn't know if I would have blessings. I didn't know if I would really have any kind of life, because everything was inside. So for me, it played a big role.
Yeah, safety, I think, was one, because that's what I knew. I mean, we grew up and that's, what you know. And so, growing up, being active in sports and stuff most of my life, I saw individuals who were, that were gay playing softball. And I saw the stereotypical type things where they were promiscuous, they were heavy drinkers, and that was so different from my upbringing. And so to identify with people like that was difficult to me. And so then I would revert back to church, but you couldn't hide the feelings that you were having or the attractions that you were having. And so there was always a battle, because that's all I knew, being fairly sheltered. And I also, as I think back, I'm like, I also am a story creator in my head. So people who are around me, why I was so closeted, I didn't give them the opportunity, by being open. I didn't give them the opportunity to understand or to have a conversation about it. I created a story that they would leave, that they would, I would be alone, that I would, all of those kind of things. And so that is something that, kept me in the closet a little bit more, because one, I didn't want to be like the stereotype, didn't want people to leave. And so there was just this shove the feelings down. Mm-hmm.
Well, and one thing we've talked about together too is the fact of inside, we knew the rules. Like we knew what the steps were, we knew what the measures were, we knew where the boundaries were. And outside of that, there's just so much unknown. I think for me too, that was one thing that kept me in, is I didn't know any of those answers outside of there. And so it was a little easier to stay in, even though, again, painful, hugely painful.
Very painful. It reminds me of an experience I had with a church leader who wanted to give his advice about what this side of the aisle looked like. And I struggled with that so much, and you kind of alluded to that. Nobody knows the doctrine better than the closeted LGBT person.
Right.
We've studied it. We understand it. when you have been compared to a contagion, a disease, a contaminant, a sin akin to murder, all the things that the church has created as verbiage against this topic, you become quite familiar with the rhetoric. And just as you mentioned, Shaunie, you do everything in your power to stay away from that, to not be labeled as that. And maybe this part of the podcast, I'm talking specifically to the church leader or the active member, the Latter-day Saint who's listening to this, saying, but if you just knew the doctrine, if you understood it better.
Right.
And I had that experience speaking with a church leader who was trying to better understand how to help members of his congregation. And he wanted to preach and be empathetic and give counsel as to what this side of the aisle looked like, having never been on this side of the aisle. And there was just this level of disingenuous teaching when I've been on both sides of the aisle. I was the active Mormon. I am also the one who's dating and in a relationship. I know what both of these experiences feel like. And if we want to talk about authenticity and honesty, let me jump on my soapbox and give you what the world feels like. Did you ever have any of those experiences or those breakthroughs or epiphanies?
As you're talking about that, it takes me back to a point in my life where I was still married to my husband. And at the end of our marriage, we had a lot of tumult. You know, he was struggling with his own big issues that were creating big issues in our lives together. This was a time when my own sexuality was really coming to a head and I was getting to face it. And at the same time, I was having what I call this incredible spiritual learning by fire hose. It wasn't necessarily, I had done the 12-step program that the church used to have before they have their current program. And when I got to step 11, and I did it on being gay, because I don't even know if I was trying to make it go away. I don't ever recall saying I want this to go away. But step 11 was a big epiphany for me. Like, wait a minute, I don't have to have people between me and God. I can have my own revelation. Like, I knew that, but I didn't really know that. And so going through this whole phase of amazing spiritual learning, feeding by fire hose, that was just like coming so quickly, and things that went along with what I had learned inside of the church, but just really broadened out into these sometimes mind-twisting but amazing ahas that I couldn't wait to live, but also was afraid. And so at one point I went, after I was divorced, went into my bishop to, the church was helping pay for my rent. And so just going in to have a check and just say, hey, I'm doing well, you know, we can make some adjustments. And we had changed a bishopric, and he gave me we asked me about my temple recommend, which had just expired. And I was like, well, I'm not going to renew it. You know, so he asked the next question. I had said, hey, God, I'm going to go have this interview with my bishop, and I really don't want to talk about any of this. I'm not ready to talk about any of this. But if you want me to, I guess I will. So he kept asking the questions. And he's like, well, have you done anything? And I just answered the question, said I've done enough. And then I got the lecture about what it was going to be like, what the road and the journey was going to be like. And I just listened. And I was really super grateful. Well, I was not very happy with God at that moment, because I'm like, I didn't want to talk about this. And then it just came to me, this piece of, I've taught you something different. And you can listen and be grateful that he's doing what he knows how to do at this point, but be grateful that you have been taught something different. And when he was done giving his spiel, he handed me a food card, which I was really grateful for. And he said, is there anything else? And I actually said, yeah, I just need you to know that I'm freaking amazing. And he paused and he's like, yes, you are. Mm-hmm. But I was really grateful. Had I not had the journey that I had been on, I think I probably would have been destroyed. And that's what frustrates me about some people's journeys and sometimes mine too, is that they didn't have that particular learning, and it destroys them. It destroys them.
It does. It eats them from the inside out.
Shaunie probably has more stories of destruction than I do.
Lots of different things. Well, I had lots of experiences, but in living with guilt and shame throughout your life of, knowing that you had these feelings, but experiencing different things with him. And my level of experiencing things were I would have feelings, I may have kissed someone, okay, so I'm bad, so I've got to go to the bishop. And so I probably went to 4 different bishops to get counsel, understanding, something, and they're like, oh, okay, well, let's not do that again, and then off we went. That was probably my experience with all of them. So the message that I was getting was not of counsel, but just don't do it again. Well, that wasn't really helpful, for me, because that wasn't something that was realistic.
The Mormon mindset is typically fix me. Like there's usually always a fix to everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Do this, this, and this, and then the result will happen. Then this happens.
Right. And I didn't know if going in, it took a lot for me to go in, because you think, well, I'm going to be punished and, all these horrible things. And then it didn't happen. And so I'm like, okay, well, if I don't do this, I'll be fine. So you just go through your life and you still have those crushes and you still have those experiences, knowing that, okay, well, maybe it's not so bad if they didn't give me counsel or wisdom in that direction. And so I just kind of was single, and I had chosen, living in the church, not wanting to be living authentically, and this is how I'm going to be, and therefore celibate, and never having the opportunity to hold somebody's hand. And having that mindset was tough. It was tough.
There are listeners of this podcast episode who are fierce advocates of celibacy, saying that's what the church teaches. You just needed to be celibate.
Yeah.
What is your advice to them?
Well, going through it, I think we're born for connection. So having that outward choosing of that to be celibate is not healthy, because you have to have connection. And it wasn't for me. I could be an active member of the church and hold callings and really feel that I was honorable in those callings, but I still had those feelings. They don't go away. But in being, I would be honorable in the church, but I still couldn't not have connection with someone. And I was waiting for a someone, but I never thought they would come. Because in your mind you think, oh, I'm being punished. Didn't know any different. And so I would say, there is hope. And that you can have a happy life, having connection with someone.
But you weren't trying hard enough.
That's what everyone thinks. Yeah, not trying hard enough.
Clearly you didn't have high enough callings that would have taught you to be in the...
Isn't that funny, the mindset that people go to? That even though you may have these high callings, that I learned valuable things and I learned to love, charitable, but there was something missing for me.
I think for me, the answer to that question is one. I'm glad I was probably never Relief Society president. But
and just as a side note, you were a Relief Society president.
Yes, and in the Stake Relief Society.
Yeah, when we met, she was in the Stake Relief Society presidency. For me, the celibacy thing is, I think it's ludicrous, quite frankly. We're born we're sexual beings. And, Shaunie talked about connection, and connection is awesome. There's all kinds of connections, but to really have the full expression of ourselves, that includes our sexual activities and connection in those ways. And I just, I thought about that for myself, like, okay, now I'm divorced. I don't know if that I really want to live this gay lifestyle thing. Is that the path I want to go down? And, I did have an experience with the woman who brought me out. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just waiting for the shame and the guilt to come. And like, what have I just done? And and I waited and it never came. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big eye opener for me on a lot of levels, as far as some of the things that I was taught, as far as my personal sexuality and myself as a sexual being. And so the celibacy thing for me is, for those who are listening, just maybe check in with yourselves on that one and check where the belief comes from, and maybe give it a double over and recognize your own natural humanness and part of who we are, just full expression of yourselves as far as not being celibate.
And I actually had to clear a lot of guilt and shame before you could move into that and be free and available to express yourself in that manner. So I really had to do some checking in, for sure, about guilt and shame. If I do this, if I hold somebody's hand, if I do this, I don't have to repeat the same processes that the church taught for forgiveness. I could forgive myself and let go of the guilt and shame, which then allowed me to move into the natural feelings that I could express without thinking I'm an unnatural being or going straight to hell.
I think this is the part of the interview. This is where Robert Frost just salivates. Here is the two roads diverged in a wood and I. Shaunie, you take the road of celibacy and single life. Jenn, you decide to get married. Despite knowing what you know about yourself, you choose the mixed orientation marriage side of it. Because now we're attracting a whole different audience. Walk us through that. Tell us what got you to the point where you said, I think a mixed orientation marriage, despite knowing what I know, getting into a marriage is right for me. And let's just discuss that experience and what you learned, maybe your mindset behind it, and your advice regarding mixed orientation marriages.
Okay. So for me, my experience was, I had a roommate who I had we had a lot of closeness. We kissed each other for 6 or 7 months. And we experienced that closeness. We never, we didn't ever have sex or anything like that. We hugged and we kissed and we felt that closeness. And that really woke something up in me on one end. And on the other end, my alarms and alerts of like, oh my gosh, you're being a horrible LDS person and a horrible person just in general, because I'm participating in these things that I've been told are incorrect, even though they feel so right and natural to me. Now, I had kissed several boys, and we were having this discussion earlier. Quite frankly, I would have rather kissed my brothers. It wasn't anything that was exciting for me. So when I had this experience with my roommate, it was an eye opener. But again, on the other end, I was like, this isn't really what I can do. Still didn't have a lot of vocabulary. I did have people coming out of the woodwork saying, what are you doing getting married? You're gay. And I'm like, I'm not gay. What are you talking about? I'm just being bad. And I'm going to stop that. So that was me. I married my family meeting brother from Rick's College. And he was a great guy. He's a great guy. He treated me well. And I just decided that was the path that I wanted to continue following, was the church path. Again, it's what I knew. It's what, in a lot of aspects, felt good. It's where I had tied my identity. And I didn't realize this until later, that I had tied so much of who I was and my worth and value inside of being LDS. And it worked. It worked for several years, other than when it comes to intimacy in general, just as an overall, and not even sexual. It was a little bit challenging because I could never feel really close to him. But then definitely in the bedroom, that was rough. And I had a lot of feelings of probably guilt and not being able to satisfy, and wondered if I was actually a sexual person at all. Although, let's be real, there were moments I enjoyed it, and I have to give that credit to him as well. I later had a lot of guilt about what that experience may have been like for him. And, I can't tell his story. I don't know all of that. But it became very evident to me that was not where I was going to find the full expression of myself, of my creation, of who I was as a person, and especially inside of my sexuality. And and the things that I wanted to teach my kids about all of that is that if I stayed in this particular place, I wasn't going to be able to teach them the fullness of those lessons as well.
And you had two kids.
I do. I have two daughters. Yeah, they're grown. One is recently married in the temple, and one has moved to Idaho and is pretty awesome, amazing soul.
So you both get to the point, now you end up divorcing.
Yes. We're married for 16 and a half years.
And Shaunie, you not married, but decide at some point it's time to start that exploration, start dating, and start forming some relationships.
I'm like, did you start that?
I think it just came upon me like an avalanche, to be honest. Because I was going down the path of celibacy and church, and that's what I was going to do. My family had gotten used to the fact that I had never been around anyone. I mean, I was single clear up into my mid-40s. And, you know, hadn't really, no dating experience, no relationship experience, and just was going in the church and just was like, I must have signed up for this in heaven.
But you had friends that you hung out with. You had one in particular that they watched out for each other for a long time.
I was among the noble and great ones.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh, this is what it's going to be. And you become resolute to that. And then all of a sudden, avalanche named Jennifer came along. And I wasn't anticipating those feelings or those, you know, to come up again. I mean, it was like almost overwhelming. And so it's in your face of like, oh, this is going to happen. Or you have those feelings I hadn't felt for so long that you had, you know, pushed down because you don't do that. And so really I think the decision was easy because it felt so easy, but then all of the emotion of the church stuff came out. And I mean, we probably dated because of her situation of being divorced and having kids, which I mean, dating somebody with kids, you know, was a thing.
Humanity.
Right.
Like, how can I do that? And so it just was.
Well, and Shaunie didn't know me as a church-going person. At that point, I had stepped back for emotional safety. And so
ironically, from the 12-step program.
Right, yes. And so we actually had some butting of heads with the whole church thing. And she was a nemesis for me for a while. Like, it was interesting.
Yeah. So we dated for several years, just trying to work through that process of me not only dating somebody with serious potential, but being able to come out, because I had not come out to anyone, to anything, unbeknownst to me. A lot of people had already gathered that information. How, I don't know. But
I mean, clearly you were wearing the shirt, "I'm straight, but my girlfriend is gay." That's what it was.
I mean, it just was really a surprise that people would gather that information. And I tell her, I joke, well, they only knew that I had those feelings because I was hanging around you. Because you worked so hard at that hiding that you'd be so
and
good
I had
at
stood
hiding.
from the rooftops and let the whole world know, which isn't really true, but that was what she thought I did because
like,
I was more out.
So really, to be honest, probably 80% of the people in my life found out 3.5 weeks before we were married.
Or less.
Or less, yeah, yeah. So it was really, so that point when I'm on my phone in the driveway and calling my family, telling them, and the response was quite mixed.
I'm getting married, bring rice, and I'm gay.
Like, yeah,
yes.
And I would love you to be there. And of course the shortness of it was difficult, but our process in the dating was very tumultuous, and what are we doing? And because you're letting, you know, what your beliefs of the church go as well.
There's a great disconnect there.
Yeah.
Huge disconnect.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not a disconnect from. Often when we talk about this disconnect, it's not a disconnect and pain. It's a disconnect into something greater and a step forward.
It's hard to see that though when you've not done that before. But
I rarely quote Boyd K. Packer on this podcast. But he does have a talk called "Candle of the Wind," "Candle of the Lord." I was just thinking of Elton John.
We start singing a song.
Hold on a moment. Elton John and Boyd K. Packer. There could be some correlations there. "Candle of the Lord," and he has a line in there that says that we have to walk some distance in the darkness to find that the way is lighted ahead.
Yeah.
And I know, I will assure you, as real as the heavens may or may not be, that he didn't intend the talk to be used in this way. But it is really important for us to walk into the darkness a little bit to find that the way is lighted ahead, that there really is a path for us ahead. And all the things we've talked about so far in this episode, the unsure, the unblazoned trail, the confusion, the darkness led to a different path. Yes. And that path really did exist. And it wasn't full of a loss of spirit, discount of blessings, unhappiness,
Right.
that there really was joy at the end of that journey.
I love that you're bringing this part up, because that's part of my existence is the outdoor activity and like climbing the Grand Tetons. So when I adventure, I always do it with a sense of wonder and question, and what can I learn that I can overlay into my regular life. And you just spoke it, like, hours on end in the darkest of dark nights with only a headlamp that shows you, 5 feet in front of you, and you beam your light out into the darkness, and all you see is your light. There's no answers. There's maybe a signal of a tree outline or something. And that is like our lives, is that really our lives are that darkness, and we really only have that little bit. Yet we like to think we've in church, like I feel like I was taught that we had a big old floodlight on it, when in reality, we just have that headlamp. So I love that you brought that out.
And maybe this is the important part of the herd mentality, where it's important for the LGBTQ community to find their herd, to find other people who have light, because the more lights that band together, the greater the opportunity to see the landscape. And when we all spend, and it's exactly why podcast episodes like this become popular, and people will sit through them and listen to them. It's because we're adding lights together and giving each other the opportunity to see. Yeah,
it's like that person in front of you on the trail has their light 5 feet in front of them, so you can see a little bit more ahead, and the person in front of them. So I love it. I love it.
Well,
perfect analogy.
We can see, because of my experiences, I have a different lens now to look to other people and say, in judgment, where before you automatically would judge someone, you see differently because of the perception that you didn't want to be judged. And so it's a beautiful thing that you have a commonality of people that can come together and go, okay, we're going to be all right. And we can see other people a little bit differently. And it's wonderful. And I love how she talked in her TED Talk about stepping outside the lines. You see something in the different, but just stepping out and taking that chance, taking that step forward. I think bravery. Bravery is huge. And authenticity.
Courage, vulnerability,
honesty,
all of those things. Oh man, that was probably the biggest reason right there that I came out, was the honesty thing. When I was really figuring all this out and trying to figure out what to do with my marriage, I was given a letter from a friend who's in prison. She was in prison, and I had chosen to not read anything, not to watch anything. I did not want to be influenced one way or the other, because I was in, and I was staying in. And she sent me this letter by was it Ron Schow? Schow from Pocatello. He had a gay son. Letter to an Apostle is what it was called. That was the first thing I actually read. I didn't sleep for 2 days after I read that, because of the whole thing that stood out in that for me was honesty. And I thought, I'm not living an honest life in a lot of ways. It wasn't just with this. Honesty.
I'm going to have to find that, because Ron is a great friend of the podcast. He's done so much for the LGBT community, the LGBT LDS community, in better understanding the dynamic, the dichotomy between the two communities.
Yeah.
I'm glad you reminded me of that.
Yeah, it's a great one. I'm like, I don't have a copy. I'll send it to you. Google it.
Yeah, Ron's been really great. So you get to this point where you're now out for getting married. What does the journey look like going forward? I would imagine for you, Shaunie, this is literally Aladdin's carpet. This is a whole new world. This is...
Exactly.
Because as you mentioned, Jenn's world was screaming from the rooftops.
Yes.
I'm gay.
Yeah.
I did let more people know. I had just chosen to... I thought, if you're going to be in my world, the honesty thing. And I also know the value of being vulnerable and opening those doors for other people to do that. People come to me because they've seen me being in this kind of space, and I want to continue to do that.
For me, it's a whole new experience. I've not been able to talk about it before. So, being able to put into words how you feel or what your experiences were that could help somebody else is invaluable. But I'm not screaming from the rooftops. I'm still climbing the ladder to the roof, but I'm shouting as I go, kind of along the way to the people passing by. So it is a process.
I think you're on the rooftop now, sweetheart.
Well, I'm more on the roof, but it's a process.
On the porch.
We're very different, in places where we're screaming it, but in a different way. But I feel more comfortable about it now, and I don't have the guilt and shame and the personal devastation that you feel, because now I'm like, okay, I've taken this step. I was brave, and now I'm okay. I still have some of the values and things that the church has taught me.
Absolutely.
Believe in some of those good things, and still and having a relationship with God still present, and foremost in our relationship, but not having that fear, and then being able to step out and go, okay, there are other people that were probably just like me, or getting to experience these things, and what can I say about how my experience with my family or my friends. My family didn't participate in our wedding, but my coworkers were the ones that decorated, and they were the ones that attended, and we had set out just so many chairs, and lo and behold, it was standing room only.
I love those stories. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with a lady who said her ward always threw bridal showers for every bride that was getting married. Mm-hmm. Well, her son was getting married to another boy, and what did the ward do? Threw them a party. Threw them a bridal
to that ward,
Yeah,
shower. That was that sense wonderful. Of connection, and it didn't cost a thing. When we talk about morals and values, in fact, I think for that ward, it gave them the ability to be kinder, and all those Christ-like attributes were in that bridal shower for these two grooms.
That is fantastic.
It is wonderful, and I stopped creating the stories, letting other people love me just as I am.
Without the facade.
It was a cool thing to watch her. She really struggled with getting married. And the whole concept of that, because it's so outside of what, she was taught, we were taught. And it was almost like you could feel the shift in her. You could see it. And it wasn't just me. And it's almost as if she just went, she exhaled. And the people around her were like, what is going on? Like, what's different? Because they saw that change. They watched her just settle into the whole new world.
Today you can finally breathe. So now you alluded to this, Shaunie, a little bit about Jenn's TED Talk. You've taken your real world experiences, this path of authenticity and honesty and School of Hard Knocks and the closet and the shadows and all those things, and then created a TED Talk. Let's talk a little bit about that. For those of you who want to watch it, I'll link it in here, but also a quick Jenn Saunders TED Talk. We'll find it on YouTube pretty quickly. So give us the premise behind your TED Talk. Why did it go viral and so well appreciated? What was the message that people resonated most with?
I knew that I had wanted to give a TED Talk, but never in a million years did I think that's what the TED Talk was going to be about. In fact, when I put in my application, I didn't say anything about that. But that's just kind of how it molded and formed. And I thought, am I really going to do this? I'm going to stand in Rexburg, Idaho, of all places, a place where I actually was dismissed from a coaching job because I was accused of being gay. That's the first place I really felt just that intense shame of how do I hold my head up in this place? And so going back there and standing on the big red dot, saying to the whole world, I'm G-A-Y, was really scary for me. But really it wasn't more of the concept of the TED Talk was less about being gay. That was just the lens that I spoke it through. But it was more about the lines that we create for ourselves, the boundaries to hold ourselves in for safety. For me, it was a place where I found love. It was where I found my worth. It was where I found basically everything. Acceptance from my family, from the communities around me. It's a place where I knew the rules. And so I lived in that for so long. And so the premise was more about, I started to feel things outside of that circle. I saw lights and I saw things calling my name, and I wanted to go to them. It's kind of like the sirens, but it was a matter of, did I dare do that? Did I have the courage to step across the line? And it was funny, in our rehearsal, I knew I was going to step outside the line. I wore these fancy bright socks so that they would be seen, and
because it's a no-no to step off.
Yeah, you're not supposed to step outside the circle. So I thought, this is so absolutely perfect.
This is my whole life in Mormonism.
Right here on the dot. And one of the gals, I walked the perimeter and you don't really see that a lot because of the camera work, but I walked the perimeter of that dot as I'm talking a lot. And one of the ladies was like, you stayed really close to the line, and maybe you could back up the coaches, back up a little bit. And I thought, well, you're going to love it when I actually give the talk and I step across it. I just looked, I said it was intentional. So that was part of it, is learning to live our lives intentional and to really listen to our own hearts, to check in with what's calling our names. And maybe there's an actual reason as to why it is. And it's scary. We don't always see it. Our headlamps, again, only go so far. I had started to travel when I got divorced, and so my worldview started to open up, which then really kind of, again, made me double check and the beliefs that I had been taught. And I thought, I see these people over here being completely happy, and they're not LDS. And I see these people over here, and they're completely happy. I mean, I don't know what their backstory is, completely by observation.
But on social media, they look happy.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I just saw happy people. In my TED Talk, I talk about going to Guatemala, and I had the most intense spiritual experience of being in a women's conference, and it's a women's conference of prostitutes. People who sell their bodies because it's the only thing they have left of that they feel like a value, a way to gather a living for their families. And we were building houses down there on the actual dump. I mean, these people were in the lowest of lows, and they were happy. And I'm in this conference, and they start singing, and I don't know what they're saying. And I'm in it with my sister and our interpreters. Everyone else had stayed to do an eyeglass clinic, and I was touched to my core. And I looked at my interpreters. I'm like, what? I'm sobbing, like sobbing, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? What are these people saying? And I don't even remember the words, but they were praising God for giving them all this beautiful life that they have to live, and gratitude to Him. And I thought, oh my hell, like if they can do that and feel acceptance and love as a prostitute living on the dump, then who am I to not find a way to own all that He's given me and know that I'm okay? It was a life-changing experience for me. So the talk is more about reaching out, going into the darkness, crossing the lines, but then it's also about taking the walls down for other people instead of building them up.
Who are different.
Who are different, yeah.
Who are marginalized.
And the reality is we all are at some point.
That's right.
In our lives. We all have that thing that makes us different. And I hated being different, and now the reality is the different is what makes us beautiful. And learning how to embrace that in its entirety, in ourselves individually, but then reaching out and asking someone else, like, hey, what's your story? Instead of being afraid of it, like I have people that I have rubs with, and I'm like, oh, what? And I'll call them, or I'll say, hey, do you want to have a chat? And then I find out why. And I'm always so humbled.
What is your message to the people who listen to this podcast episode?
Oh my gosh. Man, the first thing that comes to my mind is that different is okay. Embrace your own different. And for those of us who are in that, to realize, to really own that, and to not live in the story of I'm different in a way that makes us feel less than, but more in a way of like, I'm different in a way that I have something unique to give and add to the world. And to step out of those places of being angry and hurt, because that's a choice. I mean, the reality is it's a choice. Does that stuff always come and we get to acknowledge it? Absolutely. Acknowledge it. I'm not saying don't do that. But there comes a point where you've got to step across that line as well and choose happiness versus staying in the circle of the discomfort because we know it. And even though it's shitty, it's comfortable for us. But you got to step across those lines too. So embrace the different and step across the lines and really embrace your own happy. Mixed with a couple shots of I'm freaking awesome. freaking awesome.
Freaking awesome.
Yeah, we all have our own I'm freaking awesome, and really as a coach, that's the one thing I want people to really embrace is embrace their own wild, embrace their own awesome, and to realize again that they're not broken people, dented in, banged up, dirty, absolutely, but that there are people who've been there who can help dust you off and pull out the dents and help you see your own freaking amazing.
Shaunie?
I echo her statement, but it's also that you can survive. You can do this. You can be brave. You can live the life that you have always wanted. You can still have a spiritual connection with God. You can still love the person that you're attracted to. You can still do these things. You're not broken. You're not.
You get your own blessings, not everyone else's.
Yeah, and it is all part of different learning. Being willing to look at something different, breaking down the barriers of what you have known, and just kind of expanding your knowledge and having podcasts like this and getting to hear different people's stories. Like ours is so unique to us, but yet there's commonality with
so relatable to the community
with those people. I mean, just a regular, just person who likes life, who enjoys life and is happy and wants to give. To start with me first, to heal me first, and then I can do better.
Should the LDS community or a religious community be fearful of the relationship you've created? Should they be fearful of the LGBT community?
Like, I think they should, maybe take a peek in.
Yeah.
Fearful, no. Fearful, no.
I don't understand what their fear would be other than lack of knowledge. And we can give them that perspective, because if they ask the question, we can answer it, and we can say, this is what we feel, and we're okay.
Well, and it's interesting because, we're a married couple with all the issues that a married couple has.
Exactly.
Having been on both sides of that, it's no different. However, I'm able to give, like I said before, all of me to this person in a way that feels authentic. And it's interesting how people will say, well, you guys seem like you've just got this amazing relationship, which we do.
But we also have to work at it.
But we work at it, but
like
it's because we're able to really express in our fullness.
That is connection. That is authenticity. Yeah. That's often what we're talking about when someone says, well, what do you mean by being authentic and living your authentic life? It's the reason why I had to divorce was because I couldn't give 100%. 40 or 50% just doesn't make a relationship work. Yeah, and you don't necessarily realize that when you're in it. Some of us do, but it's when you're willing to take that risk of there's something different and more. What is your advice to church leaders who are listening to this episode wanting to help their congregations and maybe better understand the LGBTQ experience? I would say, ask the questions. I mean, there's so much, in the belief system of this, but ask a question of the individual. Get to understand, maybe, is it something, that were you born with it? Was it an experience that you had that created those feelings for you? Ask questions to learn, because I am not one that I would say, oh, it was something that happened to me. That wasn't my experience. Nothing happened to me to have these feelings. It just was a natural feeling that I had. So if someone were to ask questions of us, tell me about your experience, just like in these podcasts. What's it like? What is it like having those feelings, being connected? And how can I help people understand? And I would say, first of all, thank you for listening, for taking the time to find the podcast, first of all, or to take the recommendation to listen to it. And because it does take time, and it's a pretty valuable resource that we have. And so the first thing I would just say thank you and keep listening. But to go off what Shaunie says is talk to the people who are actually experiencing it. That's where you're going to find your answers. And when you've talked to enough people, you'll start seeing the patterns. You start seeing that, they really are people just like you are. And that they're people who love God, and they're people who love community, and they're people who ... have talents and gifts, and they want to be loved, they want to be heard, they want to be appreciated, just like you do as the leader or the parent or the family member. And to keep asking the questions, seek them out. Seek us out, people.
Yeah.
And I think there's wisdom in that, because often the overwhelming majority of us in the LGBT community are open books.
Yes.
And the thing that we haven't been able to do is share our story enough.
I think that's the hardest thing. I don't know all of your story, but I know in mine and Shaunie's, I think that's part of our biggest bugaboo still. And I would imagine for those who are listening is the inability, and not because we can't talk about it, but to just talk normally in our families and in some of our friend sets, is that they don't ask questions like, hey, what's that you just ask your buddies, and talk about hopes and dreams. And so, yes, we're open books, and we don't always get the opportunity.
Is there anything we haven't talked about that we wanted to talk about in this episode as we wrap up?
And I don't know.
We enjoy marriage. We enjoy being married and just and having fun in life. I mean, we really do.
And for me, I think I'm sure there's a lot of things, and we'll hit end and we'll all be like, oh, we could have. I'm going to trust that we've said what needs to be said. And if those who are listening have questions, they can reach out to us.
Absolutely.
Whether it's yourself, Kyle, or Shaunie and I, we're happy to answer those. But I think the biggest thing is, if you're struggling, reach out. There's a person sitting in this room who's behind the cameras who I have a lot of respect for, who was on a huge struggle bus. And she had the courage to reach out and say, I've been following you, I've been paying attention, and can we get together and find that person for you and get together with that person, because I've watched her whole world open up from, I hope you're okay that I'm sharing this, I promise I won't say your name, is that walking on a hilltop, sharing her struggles, coming out for the first time and saying, I had my death plan ready to go. And then to see where she's at today, and that was on the 5th of November, and to see how much her world has changed and it's opening up. And so if you're listening and you're in that place, find somebody. Find someone who's been in that place of courage and vulnerability, and like, what's that movie? I Bought a Zoo. Take 20 seconds of courage and make that phone call.
Yeah.
And start opening your own lives up.
Because there's a community of people here to scoop you up.
So
Absolutely.
many who are just ready and willing. And we're waiting for you.
I like that. With our headlamps on.
With our headlamps on.
Yes.
Campfires and s'mores at the end.
We'll have a gay old time.
Love it.
I love it.
Thank you for having
Shaunie.
us. Yes.
Jenn, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's been a fascinating episode.
Thank you.
Often I say there's little nuggets throughout each episode that people can hold on to. I think this was a powerful episode.
Oh, thank you.
About better understanding this experience. Just real. And the one thing that I kept thinking about, Shaunie, as you were talking was, I think the important message to many closeted, active LDS people who would listen to this message is the fear that choosing this or giving in means I have to sacrifice my morals and my values to get there.
Absolutely.
And I think your story is a story that you don't.
Yeah.
That you didn't have to give up all of that in order to be authentic. That you were able to live in harmony with those morals and values that you held onto and found to be important in your life. And that's true to the overwhelming majority of the people that I interview and talk with.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you're like, what did we miss something? I think that's it right there, is that for me, I don't even know how many times I said, hey, God, are you going to continue to bless me? Like, I have some hopes and dreams and goals and just everyday blessings I'd like to continue to have poured down. Or am I just going to get what spills off of everyone else's cups? And the reality is, and I appreciate that you brought up, is we get our own cupfuls.
We do.
And it spills over.
And then you allow other people
and then
absolutely
in.
Yeah.
Again, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Again, we will link your TED Talk to this podcast episode. And then if you do have a question for either of the two guests today, you'd be welcome to answer those questions.
Absolutely.
So if you are following along on a video or audio version, we have plenty of places for you to do that.
Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Another fascinating episode. I want to thank Jenn and Shaunie for giving a few minutes of their time to share their story and their experience with our Latter-gay Stories community. The Latter Gay Stories community and podcasts are made possible by viewers and listeners just like you. If you want to help us continue building bigger and stronger bridges between the LDS and LGBT community, we invite you to share this episode. Even a simple comment or a like and a share will help our reach, and it helps a lot. A single like or share sometimes doubles or triples the viewership of individual episodes just like this. So we invite you to do that now. And as we mentioned, if you do have a comment for either of our guests today, we invite you to share that below or reach out through the Latter Gay Stories website at lattergaystories.org, and we'll forward those questions along. And in real time, Jenn or Shaunie, I'm sure will be happy to reach out and share their experience and answer your question. The Latter Gay Stories podcast, your opportunity, again, to better understand this experience as we all do better when we learn and become better. And that, I really think, was the ultimate message that we picked up today. But most importantly, it's podcast episodes just like this that help you to continue writing your Latter Gay story.